Dr. John. We missed you last week. Of course, last week was Australia Day. We had a public holiday. So did you have a good day?
Yes, I had a great day, and it was very, very good. I love Australia Day. And it was a shame, actually, that we missed out because Tuesday was Australia Day. And I do want to say a few words about it this morning, because I think it's an important event on our calendar.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, obviously, controversy about the date and so on, but I think it's worth us exploring that a bit today. So we might do that a bit later.
Yeah, excellent.
But look, the first thing that I wanted to mention was some of the dramatic changes that the new administration in America has made in the first couple of weeks.
Of course, we talk about current news and what's happened over the last week. And, of course, we also answer everybody's questions here in this particular program. And we'd love you to send some questions through for Dr. John. The text line is 0401 949 949. Now, current news, Dr. John. America, it looks like things are going mad.
Well, I mean, you can look at it that way, but there are some significant changes that have happened in the first couple of weeks of the administration that probably impact on a lot of the things that we talk about on the program. And the thing that really struck me immediately was the canning of a pipeline called the Keystone Pipeline that was going to bring, I think, shale oil from Alberta in Canada all the way down through the States.
Yep.
And it was a huge project, multi-billion-dollar project, and was going to produce thousands and thousands of new jobs and so on. And that's been shelved. Which not only has that impacted on a lot of people who are going to be depending on it for jobs, but it was a bit indicative of the attitude, I suppose, towards climate change and greening. I know, as all our listeners know, we talk quite a bit about that, but it's going to impact on that. And of course, the word is that the US is going to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. So all of those things are going to have an impact on the rest of the world. You know, they say if America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. Well, any significant event in the US really impacts the rest of the world. And particularly that pipeline, because if that means that the US is no longer self-sufficient in oil, then that puts it as a player in the oil market worldwide, which suggests that maybe the prices might rise worldwide. You know, who knows? It's all very, very interesting, but it's indicative of a lot of things. I mean, when the Trump administration was there, climate change really took a bit of a back seat because they certainly weren't focused on it. But it looks like it's going to come to the fore now. And we had the Prime Minister only yesterday saying that, he's not going to increase taxes by 2050 to have a more green Australia. But who knows? Maybe we'll be pushed into something by what happens overseas, because we may be an island, but we're not on our own in the worldwide economic community.
Yeah, I've also seen in the news this week, sort of related to that, there was a story from a bunch of scientists that was saying that we've seen carbon levels in the atmosphere much higher in the past when they've done their own scientific studies than what we have today. And they were asking the question, are we really pushing the carbon levels up that much, or is this just part of a natural thing? They're saying a lot of carbon actually comes from the melting ice pack, and they're also saying that the melting ice packs, they're finding in the soil now all these nucleating agents that are being released that are going to help create snow and ice. And basically, as the ocean currents are changing with the warming, we could be going back into an ice age. I mean, it's all a little confusing for people.
It's very confusing, Mick. And you read all of these things about how say, some of the frozen wasteland is melting and releasing methane gas and so on. But we need to remember that the greatest contributor, if you like, to greenhouse gases is not methane or carbon dioxide, it's actually water vapour. And if you get any warming of the oceans, what you're going to get is more water vapour. So, you know, it's a bit hard to know just how things are going. And regrettably, I think, because most of the focus has been on, you know, the dreaded global warming stroke man-made climate change, you know, this sort of thing, that any other alternative views don't really see the light of day. You know, most of the major science magazines will favour articles that toe the party line, that man is doing dreadful things to the planet in the way of warming it, and alternative views don't get aired, which is a shame. You know, I mean, we live in an open society, and you've got to be able to have alternative views. Otherwise, you can't make a decision. Proverbs tells us that you know, it all seems to be going one way when you hear the evidence from one person in court. But when the other side is presented, then sometimes it's completely different. And I think we really need a lot more open discussion in Australia. And unfortunately, as we've seen over the last couple of weeks, censorship in the press has really reached alarming proportions, particularly in social media. People have their accounts cut off and so on because they're not saying what the rest of the world wants them to say.
And it's being censored by the wrong people.
Who has the right really to be censoring? You know, I mean, if opinions are censored, then they're censored because they don't conform with the opinion of the censorer. And who says the censorer is right? So really, we've reached a pretty difficult...
01 949 949. That's 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, in the news in the last week, we've had news of another giant dinosaur.
Yeah, well, as all our regular listeners will know, Mick, we talk a lot about dinosaurs on this program, mainly because they're of interest to everybody, but also because, of course, the time frame in which they supposedly lived. And there was a great article in Science Alert on a new dinosaur find in Argentina. And it was, they believe that it's probably the largest sauropod dinosaur ever discovered. And the previous record was held by one in Argentina as well. But this is said to be about 10 to 20% larger. I mean, that's a pretty big advance when you think the original record holder. And when we talk about sauropod dinosaurs, we're talking about things like people know the word brontosaurus. You know, that sort of very, very large animal on all fours. And the previous one was supposedly about 40 metres long. It's quite long, and weighed in at about 70 tonnes, they think. And this is 10 to 20% larger. I mean, that's quite an advance, isn't it?
It's getting close to half a footy field.
Yeah, that's right. So the excavation of creatures like that, of course, is a very, very slow process. And this one's been going on for about 5 years. And the reason, of course, is that the bones are embedded in sedimentary rock. So trying to expose it is very, very painstaking work. But some of the photos were great. They have to slowly remove the sandstone to expose the bones. And there it was. I was intrigued to see that it was on the side of a hill. And they gave it an age of about 90 million years, of course, because not because they made any measurement that gave them an age of 90 million, but just, you know, you find these bones and you give it the age that you believe it has. But look, it's really very, very interesting, and I suppose the points that we'd make from a biblical creationist point of view is, first of all, that it's in sedimentary rock.
Yeah.
So that means it's been deposited by water. Secondly, it's on the side of a hill. So it certainly hasn't, died evolution-wise and fallen into a pit and got fossilised that way. Something different has happened there. And of course, the vertebral column and tail are largely intact, so it hasn't been scavenged. If a pack of hyenas or whatever might have been like that living at the time had scavenged it, well, the bones would be all pulled apart, but they're not. So it's all been intact.
Yes, and I guess if you're thinking about hyenas and the size of them compared to a dinosaur, well, think about dinosaur times. There's a lot of dinosaurs back then that used to eat each other that were a lot bigger than hyenas too.
I wasn't seriously suggesting they might have been hyenas, but they might have been dire wolves or something like that. We talked about them last time. But that would scatter the bones. But the Bible would say that that dinosaur has perished in Noah's flood about 4,500 years ago, not 90 million years ago. And it probably got buried in sediment, and later the ground got uplifted, just as the Bible says it did after the flood. And I think the important take-home point for Christians is that there's never anything in these discoveries that contradicts what the Bible says. All the finds are absolutely consistent with our Bible, and we never have to adjust our beliefs to fit in with new discoveries. The scientists adjust their beliefs to fit in with their new discoveries, but what we find is that they always fit in very, very well with the Bible. And there was another article about ichthyosaurs. That's another form of dinosaur that appeared on the creation.com website only recently as well. Now, when you read all of these words, ichthyosaur, what does that mean? It comes from two words, ichthys for fish, the Greek, and saur, the dinosaur, just like hadrosaur. Wherever you see saur, that means dinosaur. And ichthyosaur is one a bit like a fish. But this was an interesting article because these were Swedish researchers, and they'd actually found some intact skin from this ichthyosaur. We've got plenty of ichthyosaur fossils in Australia, by the way, but this was a Swedish discovery, and ichthyosaurs were sea creatures, and really that means fish-type lizard, but it didn't have scales, but it was intact skin. Now, it wasn't just a skin impression in a rock, it was a piece of skin. Now, they gave it an age of 110 million years or whatever, but you wouldn't expect a piece of skin to last quite that long.
No. I remember you telling us a little while ago there was I think it was somebody got murdered, or it was a potential murder, and they wanted to test some DNA, and it was about 100 years ago, and they figured out that there was no way they could even test the DNA because it was just too mucked up, and that's 100 years, and to have skin lasting millions of years, it really doesn't sound
It does
viable,
stretch
does
the
it?
imagination, doesn't it? And they also found with this ichthyosaur what they thought might have been fossilised blubber, and they were wondering whether ichthyosaurs might actually have been warm-blooded creatures, because they know that they were air-breathing. They had to put their snout up to breathe. So maybe they were not reptile or fish-like. Maybe they were mammals. But I mean, who knows? We're always speculating with fossils like this. But look, it's really interesting stuff, and I love reading all the articles that come up about dinosaurs, because you can always see what the assumptions that the researchers have put into their description, but nothing ever hides the fact that it's always consistent with what the Bible said. And of course, the world doesn't believe that Noah's worldwide flood ever happened. But everything we find is absolutely consistent with that. The Bible tells us that all living creatures apart from those in the ark died. Now, that's why we've got all these billions and billions of fossilised dinosaurs and other creatures. The world has the belief that they evolved and fell into pits and got fossilised, but fossilisation doesn't seem to happen these days. You need an extraordinary event to do it, and we had one. People don't want to believe it.
Absolutely.
Rising issue, because of the date.
Yes.
I mean, I don't think anybody objects to having an Australia Day on which we celebrate all that we've got here. I mean, what a wonderful country we live in. Really, we've got so much to be thankful for. You look at the news and you see that overseas the whole world's in turmoil because of this virus.
And we're so blessed here.
For us, it's just a bit of a nuisance, right? It's causing very little problem. It's not a life or death issue for most of us here. So we've got plenty to celebrate and be thankful for.
Yes.
And I think it was a great idea that they changed the word of the national anthem. I think, to replace young with one was a great idea.
Yep.
And look, haven't we got so much to be thankful for there? Because we live in a society where people really are equal. We don't have a class or caste divide in this country. Everybody's got the same rights. We have just got so much to be thankful for, even if we don't have all the same material benefits. But look, I was thinking about the few days leading up to it, and when you think about it, the first fleet arrived in 1788. Okay, and they knew where to come because Captain Cook had mapped a bit of the east coast.
Yes,
but they didn't know what was beyond that, and I'm sure that the local indigenous people who lived in the land at the time. They would have had their names for all the various regions around.
Yep.
But, I mean, all the first fleeters knew was that they were coming to this place that might have been called either New Holland or Captain Cook said it looked like Wales, so it was New South Wales. And so up they go and they hoist the flag at Circular Quay. So, and look, they knew the world was round, right? And they knew that this was another land, but they didn't have the faintest idea. Nobody had the faintest idea that here we are, a planetary ball suspended out there in space, and when you're out there in space and you look down on that world, what you see is the outline of all of these countries. And we see this one from space with the shape that we're all familiar with. When we look on a map, we see that it's got the word Australia plastered over it. But nobody had the faintest idea back then that this was really the land that everybody, both Indigenous people and the new arrivals, were living in.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the modern world we now live in, and I really can't see much point in regarding the date as offensive, because it really is a transitional point in world, global, Australian history. Just like every country in the world has got dates that are transitional points. Things have happened on those dates, and some of those dates are celebrated and some of them are not. But Britain was overtaken by the Normans in 1066. There've been other dates in history where countries have been taken over by other countries. When you think about events that are celebrated, it amazes me that the French would celebrate Bastille Day. Now, okay, Bastille Day was the freedom of the prisoners from the Bastille prison and the overthrow of the monarchy, but look what followed. I mean, the French Revolution was a very, very bloody event in world history, and yet the French people celebrate it.
Yep.
Now, at the same time, the British weren't celebrating it. You know, Charles Dickens wrote A Tale of Two Cities, comparing London and Paris, and what was going on in Perth. So, look, I think it's very, very interesting that so many of the dates in world history are celebrated because atrocities were committed, or are not celebrated because atrocities were committed. You know, it's just one of those things that happen. And I think we have to remember that the history of our country is not all bad. Okay, there were definitely atrocities, and a lot of them were actually much later than 1788. A lot of them came even after Darwin had published his stuff. So, and we believe at Creation Ministries that that's had a huge impact. But look, there really was a lot of friendliness and cooperation between the early explorers and the local indigenous people.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd just mention a bit about that when we come back.
Yeah, so it should be a date to be celebrated because we didn't get off the boat and immediately go into battle. That wasn't the plan. You are on 94.9. It is 8:45. I'm with Dr. John, who's answering SMS. Our text line 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, I was thinking a bit about Australia Day, which, some people have sort of grabbed hold of it and said, hey, it's Invasion Day, and it's become a bit of an issue. People are now arguing about Australia Day. Well, I was thinking I should call it Banishment Day. My ancestors were all convicts, and I can't imagine they were particularly happy on that date either. They were banished from the homeland and sent out to basically this giant great prison called New South Wales. And, not everybody has a great picture of Australia Day as far as what happened on that date. However, it's a date that we celebrate nowadays. We have barbecues and we celebrate everything good about Australia. And now, sadly, there's people saying, hey, we want to use this date for some sort of political gain. And that's a bit of an issue, particularly when people like myself, and I think there's like 7 of my ancestors came out as convicts. So I can't imagine my ancestors ever celebrating that date as a great day. And I just imagine, if China said, we're going to invade Australia, and today they came and invaded Australia, and in a few years they decided to call it New China Day. Well, we'd probably have our nose a little bit out of joint because we didn't see it as New China, and maybe in a few generations the Chinese that live here would be saying, hey, we've lived here all our life, we were born here. And we'd be thinking, yeah, but you didn't used to be here. But really the world has had so many changes over the years, and you've even talked about DNA. From, the Aboriginals, they tracked Ernie Dingo's DNA, and over the years it ended up back in the Middle East. So at the end of the day, pretty much everyone on the planet has moved around from somewhere to somewhere else. And so, to me, it's just a day we celebrate as being Australian. What happened on that date, it's interesting history.
Yeah, well, I'd probably go along with you, Mick. I can't match your 7 convicts, but I can come up with 3. so we were sort of in the same boat there. But
so, what do you reckon? We go for Banishment Day?
No.
Okay.
But look, I wanted to talk a little bit about Matthew Flinders, because he arrived about 7 years after that first fleet, and I wanted to make the point that a lot of what happened was not confrontational with the local indigenous people. And Bass and Flinders went off in a little boat and circumnavigated Tasmania to prove that it was an island. And they had quite a lot of contact with the local indigenous people, and it wasn't confrontational contact. And then Matthew Flinders went off by himself, and, well, not by himself, but he circumnavigated Australia and mapped it. And in the process, he took a couple of Aboriginal men with him on the ship, and they helped in the exploration and mapping. So it was not a confrontational thing. And Flinders is credited with giving us the name Australia, because it was just Southland before that, and he coined the name Australia, and that name has stuck.
Yes,
which is great. So okay, there were a few skirmishes, I know, but by and large, Flinders' contact with the local indigenous people was pretty friendly.
Yes,
and very cooperative. But there's one point I really want to make about that January the 26th, 1788.
Yep.
And you have to look at it from a Christian perspective. Now, Jesus gave his followers the command to go into the world, all the world, and preach the gospel, because the whole world needed to know about the true God and the Son that he sent to save us from sin. And most of the people on that first fleet wouldn't have been thinking that, you know, the sailors and the officers and the convicts and all the other people, that wouldn't have been in the back of their mind, but it would have been in the back of the mind of Richard Johnson, who was the chaplain for that first fleet. And he'd been encouraged to come out here by John Newton, the writer of Amazing Grace, and William Wilberforce, who'd got the slave trade abolished. And we would have to say that that day in 1788 was the day that the gospel arrived in Australia.
Although I've heard so many people that spend a lot of time in Aboriginal communities talk about, you know, the stars, and they know about similar stars, and even some of the stories relate back to some of the gospel stories. Some of their Dreamtime stories are so very similar.
Well, that's because we all came from the same dispersion at the Tower of Babel only about 4,000 years ago. So that's and all of the early stories of Genesis and the Great Flood and the language differences that occurred at Babel, everybody's ancestors were there. So that's why we do have those similar stories.
Yes.
And okay, a lot of the, particularly the Aboriginal children, were not treated very well, but many Aboriginal people are going to owe their eternal salvation to the arrival of the First Fleet.
Yes. Yes, I guess it was written history as opposed to passed on history, and we know how that can change a little bit. So, yeah, good news. There was definitely good news on that boat. Yeah, for a lot of people, just not everybody.
That's right.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. John. We've got to wind up another week. There's so much more I could talk about on that. But, yeah, very interesting, Australia Day. Hey, for next week, folks, if you've got any questions for Dr. John, please send them through to the text line 0401 949 9.